Beginning with our opponent's initial proposition that human reproductive cloning should not be federally banned in the United States due to the fact that benefits gained far outweigh the negatives produced, there is no way to accurately measure the benefits that reproductive cloning may have because there has been no successful case of a mammal being cloned and living a successful life without disabilities and structural issues. Yes, many have been cloned, but none of them have been like you and I. They've all had problems. The assumption that new medical advancements and cures will occur as a result of reproductive cloning is just that, an assumption, with no way to prove it. The question should be whether we as humans are willing to subject other currently living and breathing human beings to reproductive cloning tests in order to create a new medical concept that potentially might not be 100% even possible. Should X number of babies have to die in the process of trying to clone one baby just so a couple's need to have a child is satisfied? There is a general consensus within the medical community that the negative repercussions are too high in order to take those kinds of risks. A poll taken by CNN in 2012 states that 90% of the American population is against reproductive cloning and believes it would negatively affect our society. Even when posed with difficult life-altering situations such as using cloning to save the life of the person that they love or helping infertile couples have children, an overwhelming number of Americans still denied the justification of human cloning. Moving on to another statement made by my opponent, reproductive clones will possess as much individuality as you and I. In rebuttal to the statement, as human beings, we are considered individuals because of our genetic and physiological differences. Our genetic identity is what allows us to grow and develop into the unique beings that we are. A clone would merely be a copy of someone else. Yes, there is the argument that environment has a lot to do with who we are and who we become as individuals, but a cloned person would still be considered a product which would be obtained through the transaction of money. This refers back to my previous statement that reproductive cloning would result in clones becoming objects of manipulation and the products of will, not necessarily someone equal to us. An example of how people who share the same DNA have issues forming their own identity is a study done by geneticist Carl Bruder of the University of Alabama at Birmingham. In his research, he found that twins can in fact experience problems in their social and personal development because of their environments where they are not considered to be individuals, they're considered to be similar. And this would only become increased with reproductive cloning. Moving on to another statement made by my opponent that reproductive cloning is no more dangerous or unethical than any other legal artificial reproductive involved procedures. When comparing reproductive cloning to in vitro fertilization, the first difference that needs to be established is that in vitro fertilization, or IVF, is a kind of partially artificial reproduction, and it essentially imitates the natural process. And while IVF practitioners do begin to introduce the characteristics of manufacture and industrial technique, they are not creating entirely new beings. And they cannot claim to control the final outcome as an artisan might shape his artifact. The end they serve is still the same: the birth of a child from the sexual union of seed from two progenitors. With reproductive cloning, the process would begin with a very specific end product in mind and would be tailored to produce the product. Regarding the safety of IVF versus reproductive cloning, in vitro fertilization doesn't nearly have as many failed attempts as reproductive cloning. It took approximately 3 years for a trial and error before a healthy child was successfully born as a result of in vitro fertilization, whereas reproductive cloning has spent decades only producing failed or abnormal results. And when discussing the ethical issues between abortion and reproductive cloning, you're discussing someone who doesn't have say. Like, you're not going to know the opinion of the person being created. You're only going to know the opinion of a woman who's having a child aborted. And moving on to another statement made by my opponent, reproductive cloning is a procreative liberty born and destined in human rights. Rights are socially negotiated, and no right to clone oneself has ever been established. Even if reproductive cloning is successful, it does not mean that the clones will be considered equal. Oh. Aww. Okay. Thank you. I hope I've convinced you that our claim is true.